Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Mitch. Good Wednesday morning to you all. I hope you folks are doing great out there this morning and having a fantastic start to your day and a great week out there so far as we're about halfway through it. The weather continues to be very active. It's been active over the last several days and it will be active once again today. Yesterday was a tricky one. You know, we talked about the event that was going to unfold yesterday afternoon, yesterday evening, yesterday morning. And, we took a look at some of the short range model guidance, did not really show any convection, any shower or storm activity go pop up in Oklahoma, and it certainly did. It was just a wild afternoon, evening. We had confirmed tornadoes up in Kansas, like the northwestern portion of the states. And then we just had some wild storms in Oklahoma yesterday, especially after the sun went down, with a storm that had some wild motion to it in southern Oklahoma. So if you're somewhat active in the weather community, you kind of heard about what happened last night in southern Oklahoma, but it's going to be another wild day of weather today. And that's, what we're here to do. We're here to get detail for you folks, break down each state individually. We might group a couple states up in one timestamp, but take advantage of those timestamps, guys. They're there to help you folks. I take time, 5 to 10 minutes after the video, to add those timestamps in there. I understand not everybody has all the time in the world to jump through a video, and certainly not everybody has all the time in the world to watch a 30 to 40 minute weather video, which I am notorious for doing. But I like to get detailed. I like to be thorough. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to break it down. So we do have that enhanced risk for today. This is actually grown in size across the central and southern plains. So of course we'll speak heavily on that right off the dot, get detailed, and then we'll break down the entire lower 48. And I'm sorry to be the guy that brings you bad news, but there is already another significant storm system we are watching that's going to move in this weekend in the west and do almost, you never want to say the exact same thing, but do something very similar to what we've seen over the last several days. It's going to get negatively tilted, eject across the plains most likely, and we're going to kickstart next week with another potential multi-day severe weather risk. So let's get done talking about what's out ahead of us first, and then we do have another couple severe weather days past today that does not look significant, but a chance. And then we'll start to dive into what's going to happen early next week. So with all that being said, if you guys have not subscribed, certainly consider doing that. Like the video if you like it. Just want to say thank y'all for the growth lately. We've had some, an uptick in growth with the channel. So welcome to any new subscribers. I appreciate y'all very much. Nothing too flashy with this channel. We just keep it, we have like a personal level to it, and I do it in my bedroom here. There's nothing too crazy, but one thing we do different here is we're a family type atmosphere. We get very detailed here. We look out for one another, and we pray for one another. And speaking of prayer, if you guys got anything that I can pray about or pray over, as always, please put those in the comments below. So 3-minute intro, sorry about that. Let's get rocking and rolling. So we got a lot of rain that's heading out of the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes region. You're waking up to a pretty soggy start up here. I know, Steven, let me know how much rain you received overnight. We got some rain here in southeast New England that you're dealing with. A little bit of rain over here in Nova Scotia. Some showers and storms still lingering around from an upper disturbance that kind of flew through the southeast yesterday. I got a whopping 4/100ths of an inch of rain. I guess that's better than nothing. It was just enough to kind of dampen the ground here in central South Carolina, but I'll take it. But we do have some scattered downpours in the eastern Carolinas. We got this area of energy left over from overnight flowing through Oklahoma, starting to move into Arkansas. And we'll see how the atmosphere recovers in the southern and central plains as this eventually will move on out and kind of dwindle away. We do have some moisture already ahead of this surface low starting to develop off the Rockies from this ejecting trough in the west, and we got some moisture kind of flying across Nebraska that will become much more widespread across the Midwest and the northern plains. Really, I would say the upper Midwest throughout the morning and afternoon hours. A little bit of moisture because of lower pressure out here in central and northern Rockies. Outside of that, everybody else is pretty chill. Watches, warnings, and advisories. We do have flood watches up in areas of eastern Texas, Louisiana. We could get a lot of rain, and some of these areas have already picked up a lot of rain, but we can get a lot more rain here in eastern Texas over the next, I would say, 36 hours, and we'll actually zoom into that and talk about that a little bit. We are dealing with a lot of fog across the southeast, even some fog where there isn't dense fog advisories, but dense fog advisories up for these counties showing in the gray, and then we have the red flag warnings up for fire danger here in New Mexico, areas of Colorado, the panhandle of Oklahoma, and Texas. Ahead of a lot of dry air that's going to surge in from the southwest, or basically on the southern end of an ejecting surface low across the middle of the country. Some winter weather alerts across the northern Rockies, Moving past this, we do have 2 areas to watch for flooding today. In the red area, we have at least a 40% chance of rainfall exceeding flash flood guidance within 25 miles in a given location. So we do have a more elevated area of a risk of flooding here in this region, and we are going to zoom into that when we break down Oklahoma and Texas. Slight risk around that. In the yellow, that means there's at least a 15% risk of flash flood guidance being met. And you also have that up here too. And we'll also show you how much rain you could potentially get up here in the Midwest and areas of the plains too. We'll zoom into that area. So let's just go on and dive right into this. We're going to take a look at the Storm Prediction Center here and break it down in individual areas to kind of get you guys that live in these areas a better, I guess you would say, vantage point of what can happen as far as the threat areas. But this is the broad look. You do have the enhanced risk right in here, which has kind of gotten more strung out, more larger here. Slight risk in the yellow that extends from southern Nebraska all the way deep down here in southwestern Texas. That enhanced risk is in the orange, level 3 out of 5, slight level 2 out of 5, and the dark green is a level 1 out of 5. General risk of thunderstorms for a pretty large area. And I want to note, over the next few days, a large area of the country is going to run the risk of thunderstorms. But of course, not everybody's going to have the ingredients for severe weather. But I'll show you what I mean here towards the end of the video. But let's just zoom into this, okay? And I'm not going to leave you folks in Kansas, Nebraska hanging. I got a zoomed in timestamp for you folks too, so take advantage of that for sure. But Oklahoma and Texas, enhanced risk in the orange. I mean, this includes Woodward, Abilene, San Angelo, everybody in between. Doesn't, of course, show all the small towns and communities, cities, but it shows some of the maybe larger populated regions. But enhanced risk here in the orange, slight risk in the yellow, Dallas-Fort Worth area, Waco, I mean, almost all the way down to Austin, Fort Stockton, Midland. So you guys have the slight, and then the marginal risk, Tulsa, Shreveport, down to Houston. I mean, I could see this slight risk actually getting kind of extended southeastward over here. I'll kind of talk about why here in a second, but, don't ignore the storms and the marginal risk. So what is this driven off of? Well, as of right now, and I know I reiterate that over and over and over again, but I like to do that because on the day of a severe weather event, the Storm Prediction Center will make changes. So as of right now, in the brown area, you have a 5% risk of a tornado within 25 miles in a given location. Remember, we only had a 5% risk yesterday, and we had multiple tornadoes reported. Some of the more notoriously known storm chasers like Reed Timmer, I think, what's his name, Aaron J. Jack, got some really great storm footage, some tornado footage from what happened, and I believe it was like northwestern Kansas yesterday. I'm sorry, northeastern. Somebody says that I mess up my directions sometimes. Trust me, I know my directions. When you're constantly saying different directions, you're going to mix it up. But it was northeastern Kansas. Now that I think about it, I think I said northwestern Kansas earlier in the video. But anyways, 5% risk of a tornado in the brown area. Green area, a 2% risk of a tornado within 25 miles in a given location. As you're moving forward here, the wind outlook in the red area, there's a 30% chance of winds exceeding 55 to 60 miles per hour. In the yellow area, there's a 15% risk of that. So we do have that risk of winds, higher in risk of maybe damaging winds down here near Abilene, San Angelo, all the way up to Childress, close to Wichita Falls. But don't ignore it in the yellow area also. And then the risk of hail is going to be pretty large. One thing to note, if you're, don't have a ton of knowledge on the weather, and I don't expect everybody to have the same amount of knowledge, or me or the other guy that does YouTube weather or anything like that. But the more fuel in the atmosphere you got, typically, the more higher end chance of hail you got. Now, that does not always mean that. You got to have cooler air aloft, but a lot of times, the further west you work, the more cooler air aloft that you have, just because it's a steady increasing elevation as you move out west. Of course, the higher up in elevation you are, the closer you are to the cooler air, deeper or further up in the atmosphere, if that makes sense. And a lot of times you'll have a cold front with an ejecting trough that's bringing a lot of cold air aloft. So you have that a lot of the times, a lot more of the times out here, and dry air aloft too, which is a big player in lapse rates and things like that. So what I'm trying to say is you can get very large hail easily more obtained out here and out west than you can like in the eastern U.S. But in the red area, there's a 30% chance of hail exceeding 1 inch in diameter or larger. In the yellow area, there's a 15% risk of that. Okay, but if you notice in the black outline region here, there's a 10% risk of hail exceeding 2 inch in diameter or larger. But the Storm Prediction Center does mention hail most likely will occur somewhere in excess of 3 inch in diameter or larger. Okay, so we're going to have some very large hail today. All right, now let's move a little bit further north. This is including Kansas, Nebraska, even Iowa, and even Missouri. Enhanced risk down here: Great Bend, Hutchinson, Pratt. You guys have the enhanced risk level 3 out of 5. The slight risk: Dodge City, Hayes, Salina, Manhattan, Emporia, Colby, up to Kearney, Nebraska. I think it's, God, you guys have already told me. Hastings, York, Lincoln, Grand Island. A lot of people correct me in the comments, but if I do not repeat it every single video, I do not memorize it. What they say, you gotta say it like 7 times before you really memorize it. I need to maybe just practice on that a little bit more. Kansas City, St. Joseph, Omaha, Norfolk, Ords, North Platte, Goodland, Garden City. You guys have the level 1 out of 5 risk. What is this driven off? Some of the same similar stuff. You do have that 5% risk of a tornado all the way up here in the central Nebraska in this central Kansas. There I go, mixing up the states. You guys keep calling me out. It'll help me. But you got the 2% risk of a tornado within 25 miles in a given location, all the way up here into southern Nebraska. So that's in the green. 5 is in the brown. You go down here and look at the severe wind outlook. Good chunk of the heart of Kansas into southern Nebraska has that 15% risk of winds exceeding 55 to 60 miles per hour. And then you look at the severe hail outlook. Still a big deal up here too. Not only do you have the 30% risk and the 15% risk of hail exceeding 1 inch in size or larger, you also have the hatch risk up here too, including Great Bend, Hayes, Salina, Pratt, Hutchinson. You got that 10% risk of significant hail, which is 2 inch in diameter or larger. This does not extend up to Nebraska. This is more so a Kansas thing, but this could change throughout the day for sure. But of course, next we will look at and break down what the radar could do today. Now, I mentioned the HRRR model did horrible in Oklahoma yesterday, especially. Not as bad in like Kansas, but horrible in Oklahoma. Didn't really initiate any storms. So just note, I know that I typically always show the HRRR model. If I went through all the short range model guidance, these videos would go even longer than what they do. And we all know that my videos are already extremely long. So we're going to kind of, test the NAM also, see what it's showing. But let's just start by looking at the HRRR model again. Hopefully it handles this better today. We'll start off around 1 p.m. If you're ever confused about the timing, look right here. Back this up 1 hour because this is stuck in Eastern time. And of course, Texas, Oklahoma, these areas, Central time. So this is technically 1 p.m. As you notice, not a whole lot going on. A little bit of scattered downpour activity, maybe surging through southern Texas, central Texas. But you start to make your way into 3 p.m. Here's some big storms kind of riding out of northern sections of Mexico that eventually will drift into Texas. And we got some big storms forming, south of, I believe what is that? Well, that's around the Fort Stockton area, south of Odessa. And then these will continue. And then we start to get to around 5 p.m. This quickly develops into a cluster of very intense storms. And I'm telling you, you are going to have rocket fuel for storm energy. Cape levels will be extremely high in this area for these storms to really fuel on and really just kind of munch off that energy, if you will. And then you keep this going. You start to get to about 7 p.m. Look at these storms up here, like north of Childress right here. Look at this storm. This could produce all hazards. Very large hail, tornadoes. You got some nasty looking storms down here. Maybe not as much flow aloft for these storms down here to really produce like a tornado or anything, but it's very possible. You cannot rule it out. And then this continues. We get to about 9 p.m. Remember Dallas, Fort Worth over here, Wichita Falls up here. So not quite into that region. But these storms are starting to get close and they've already kind of moved through like the San Angelo region. If they are going to affect around 9 p.m., maybe some more storms. These start to get closer to like San Antonio. Start getting very close to like Austin, for example, 9 p.m. Abilene, these storms are blasting through later this evening. I mean, you got to watch all these storms. The more discrete that these storms can get, if you can get like a cluster of storms that become more discrete, meaning kind of isolated, the more, I would say, very large hail that these storms will produce and more of an isolated tornado threat. You're going to have a higher risk of that is what I'm saying. But, you continue to make your way throughout the evening. You're at about midnight tonight. And these storms are kind of rumbling through central Texas, starting to get into southeastern Texas. You'll get some stormy conditions overnight, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But this is the reason why I do think they could extend the slight risk down here. These are some really intense storms kind of moving through Austin. what is it, College Station. I always get Pennsylvania and Texas mixed up. College Station, State College, but where Texas A&M is, you could get some really bad storms around this area after midnight tonight. And eventually, I mean, like I said, I mean, this is about 5 o'clock in the morning. This is still going. I mean, this is a Boeing line of storms. That's why I do think they'll extend that slight risk further southeast in Texas. And I do think, you're going to have a real threat of damaging winds overnight. If you live down here in southeast Texas, up here in northeast Texas, these storms are still rumbling through, but, not as intense. And I know I've just really talked about Texas in this. But, guys, you could very well, and remember I told you, Oklahoma HRRR model did horrible. But, if you were to take the HRRR model and say this is what's going to happen, it would say, hey, you're not going to really get any storm development up here unless you're in the southern sections like Ardmore. These areas right in here of Oklahoma, you guys could get some storms late this evening into the overnight hours, the wee hours of the morning. But let's take a look, and I hadn't even looked at it. Let's take a look at what that NAM shows. Does it show a different scenario for especially Oklahoma? And kind of same situation down in Texas. You see those storms. But look, you got some more storms showing up here, especially in northern Oklahoma, some storms in western Oklahoma. And definitely, look, I mean, especially into the overnight hours, definitely a lot more storm coverage. Oklahoma City to Tulsa, you're getting some storms. But, even the NAM doesn't really show much in the way of anything too crazy, but it does show these storms up here in the panhandle of Oklahoma and Texas, kind of northeast of Amarillo. And these could be more intense than what the NAM is kind of depicting here. And so just note, I wanted to compare both model guidance. The NAM is showing something different for Oklahoma, showing some storms. And just remember, the HRRR model did not handle it very well. But the NAM and the HRRR model pretty much agree with a lot of storm activity down here in Texas late this evening into the overnight hours. So what about the updraft velocity swath? So this is between now and tomorrow morning. This basically just indicates where there's rotation with these storms. That just because you see this bright, vibrant pinks, that doesn't mean there's a 100% chance you're going to see a tornado. It just means that these storms will be rotating somewhat, even if it's broad, which means you got broad rotation, most likely not going to get a tornado. But you definitely will get some, spinning updrafts out here, some large updrafts, which means you're going to get very large hail. I wish the Weather Bell would add some sort of hail parameter here. I know that weathermodels.com has that. I used to use that site back in the day, but then switched to Weather Bell. But just note that any of these storms could be rotating. And if you kind of switch the NAM and kind of look at this, the storms that the NAM does show forming up here in the panhandle of Texas and Oklahoma and western and just all of Oklahoma, you see these pockets of colors. This is where it's indicating where we can have those rotating thunderstorms. So be aware of that. Okay, I mean, any storms that form will have a chance to produce a tornado with that 5% risk of a tornado extending down into here. Into Texas. Winds, a lot of these winds you see up here in the panhandle of Oklahoma and Texas is just for this, because of this surface low developing to the north in Colorado. This will kick up that southerly, southwesterly flow, and that's why you have those red flag warnings. But you see these pockets of more highlighted reds and stuff like that down here in Texas and even up into here. This is for these storms that they're trying to depict. So with those storms, I mean, you're going to have 50. Look down here. See these reds? You're going to have 50, 60, 65 mile per hour wind gusts capable of being produced with some of these storms. So damaging winds are a big threat. And I just don't have anything to show you for hail, but I'm telling you, very large hail with any storm. If your county or area gets under a severe thunderstorm warning, tornado warning, also obviously acknowledge the fact that there's a tornado if it's the tornado warning. But the very large hail, it can cause a lot of damage too. It really can. But this is rainfall between now and about the next 30 hours. Okay, between now and about midday tomorrow. Look at this area down here in Texas. 2, 3, 3.5 inches of rain. Weird little pockets right in here. I'm not sure what's going on. Some disagreements from the National Weather Service here in Oklahoma, but definitely rain possible. But you notice it cuts off pretty significantly here to rainfall, to nothing, and that's why you got those red flag warnings up in New Mexico and areas of Oklahoma and Texas. A lot of dry air for sure, and windy conditions. Let's move up here to our friends here in Kansas. And guys, we are going to include the southern half of Nebraska, small section of western Missouri, and then southwestern Iowa into this also. Might even throw in Oklahoma again into this. So we'll start off this morning, once again, the HRRR model. Not a whole lot going on. We're going to get some scattered showers that are just going to be ongoing across the morning hours, potentially, across areas of Kansas, even southern areas of Nebraska. These could drift, and these could eventually gain some steam, maybe pack a punch, maybe become severe warmed here in areas of Kansas, right where Missouri and Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa kind of get really close to one another here. So definitely be mindful of that. As you can tell, there's one intense storm kind of showing up here, but it's these right here. See this one that kind of blows up, I would say east of Dodge City. These are the storms right in here that you want to watch. And, the HRRR model does fire up a cell down here in the Texas-Oklahoma state line, here in the Panhandle. So, it's not totally void of convection, just doesn't show a lot. But these are the storms right here that immediately become, within 30 minutes to an hour, they will grow substantially and immediately be producers of all hazards. Okay, and then you keep going. How discrete are these storms going to be? Right? What's the moisture content going to be all the way up here? Does some of these storms elevated down here? They certainly won't be. And I'm telling you, the models are going to struggle with this, especially with these kind of discrete setups. But you got some nasty cells showing up here, kind of in the same area where you had those tornadic storms yesterday in northeastern Kansas. Look at these storms right in here. Look at these storms here. This is around 8 p.m. Tonight here in Kansas. And you keep these going, these will kind of drift. Man, I'm really concerned about these storms right here. They're kind of discrete. There's going to be 1 to 2, maybe 3 supercells down here in southern Kansas, most likely. It's around 10 p.m. You still got probably some sort of boundary up into here. You still got some nasty kind of southern flank supercells. Southern flank is what I mean, like off the southern edge of all this convection up here in Nebraska and Iowa and northwest Missouri. You want to watch these storms here. I mean, look at these supercells kind of trying to form and say, hey, look at me too. Kansas City, once again, some nasty weather's possible like last night. And you got to watch like northwestern Missouri. But look at this cluster of storms. There's a lot going on. You can watch these all day, but it's really these you want to watch out. Hutchinson's right in here. You just want to watch this cluster of storms. And guys, they could be very slow movers. So it could be somebody's worst nightmare. And for a storm chaser, if it happens before the sun sets, this could be some very photogenic and visible storm structure, potentially a tornado. But let's, of course, our focus isn't that. Our focus is trying to keep people alert and safe and hoping that the worst case scenario does not happen. But you just, in general, want to watch these storms down here. You do. You really do. They'll be slow movers, and eventually they'll kind of drift into the night to the wee hours of the morning. What is the NAM showing with these storms? Let's go on and just compare it to this too. Let's back it up a little bit. This is this morning. NAM is just weird. The NAM immediately develops almost a line of storms, kind of pops up some storms as early as 4 p.m., kind of, between Dodge City and Hutchinson, kind of turns into a line of storms. Topeka's getting some storms. This is around 6 p.m., and just kind of just turns into just a diagonal line of storms, kind of just draped across southern and eastern areas of Kansas. And just kind of weird evolution, and just kind of sweeps this line of storms and then develops another line of storms overnight through kind of, I would say, at an edge of a cold front that sweeps across the state. So, both models totally disagree as far as the evolution of the storms. And the timing's a little off, but it's really the evolution of the storms that stands out to me. If you look at the significant tornado parameter, there it goes spiking right there. But, it begins to spike around this cluster of storms too. But you notice it cuts off pretty significantly up here in northern Kansas, up into Nebraska. That tells me there's probably some sort of boundary right in here separating very favorable thermodynamics and not so much favorable thermodynamics. And so you just want to watch into all this energy, because remember, the significant tornado parameter just tells us where the atmosphere most supports ingredients for tornadoes. Just because you see these bright pinks, 10s, doesn't mean there's a 10 out of 10 chance of a tornado. Remember, I say that all the time, but it's true. I just want to reiterate that. But, it's spiking down here in southern Kansas, this little energy right here that's not really tapped into on this run of the HRRR model here in eastern areas of Kansas. But you notice it never really spikes into Nebraska, which tells me in Nebraska, your storms are probably going to be a little bit more elevated, which means they're not surface bound, which means, you probably run a lower risk of tornadoes, is what I'm trying to say. Large hail still there, lower risk of tornadoes. But that HRRR model does show those supercells right around the Kansas area down to Topeka or over to Topeka, points north. And, it showed this too. The 8-strip-R model did a pretty good job with northeastern Kansas yesterday. Just did a terrible job in Oklahoma. But it does show that possibility of some rotating thunderstorms, some supercells down here in southern Kansas. So please be aware of this. This could very well be in northern Oklahoma. So keep that in mind, guys. So, and this is all driven off this. And I'm not going to stay on this forever. But you see this area of lower pressure right here? Watch how it kind of tilts like this when I put this in motion, okay? I'm probably going to have to re-click on this, yeah. Watch how it's kind of tilting. You're getting into Wednesday afternoon. I'm sorry, this afternoon, this evening. You see how these kind of isobars down here are kind of buckling? There's little weird splotches of blue. That is in response to a developing surface low in Colorado moving into the plains, okay? And that is in response to this trough tilting and really ejecting across the northern plains. So that typically when you see this line right in here, for example, the more flatter it is, kind of flat lining, the more stable the atmosphere is. The more you see it buckling like this, the more energy is in the atmosphere. And you see that here, and that's basically this movement of this trough in response to a surface low developing, and that is what causes your ingredients for severe weather. And if you look at this as far as your ingredients on the table, we are only going to take a look at southern Kansas points south here. We just don't have the time to cover every single area. But, you look at the dew points, already a lot of moist air built into place here across what we would call the southern plains, south central U.S. So, of course, deep moisture down here in Texas, just adding to tons of fuel in the atmosphere. This is getting into, about this afternoon, starting to get into this evening. And we got pockets of dew points reaching into the 70s based off the 8-strip-R model all the way up into Kansas. But you got plenty of low-level moisture. You check that off the box, right? Plenty of low-level moisture surging in this area. And this is, I think, one of the bigger reasons why you do have a flooding risk in Texas. Look at these dew points into the low 70s. So this tells me that the column is completely saturated. So when these storms do rumble through eastern Texas tonight, all the moisture is going to be getting squeezed out the atmosphere, just saturated precipitation values, and you're just going to get a lot of rain because all the moisture in the atmosphere. And of course, you look at the energy in the atmosphere, your mixed layer cape, and because of this deep moisture in place and these lapse rates, already by about lunchtime, cape values reaching over 3,000 joules per kilogram out here in west central and central Texas, and also in western Oklahoma. Look at this building into southern Kansas. Southern Kansas. Look at this. 3,300 joules per kilogram. You're probably going to have pockets of fuel of that cape. I always call cape fuel just because it is fuel to these storms. You're probably going to have pockets reaching over 4,000 joules per kilogram. I would not be surprised. But a ton of energy builds all the way up into Kansas, probably almost all the way to the Kansas-Nebraska line. Ton of energy in the atmosphere. Okay. Next thing you'll look at is the wind flow in the low levels, about a mile above our heads, what we call the low-level jets. And, getting to about early this afternoon, not a whole lot going on. It's starting to increase up here in Oklahoma, especially Kansas, in response to this developing surface low. But once it really starts to deepen and develop, this is when the low-level jet starts to get ramped up here in western, west central Texas. And this is when we will have an issue with a big-time damaging wind threat. I wouldn't say big time, but it is an elevated damaging wind threat down here in Texas. And it's because your low-level jet ramps up to 40, 50 knots in cases. And this is really going to drive a damaging wind threat. Even in this case, once you get into Oklahoma, into Kansas, favorable low-level shear for tornado development. And you're just going to have a lot of wind energy. And I know it's showing up in pockets down here in Texas, but certainly these pockets will be favorable for damaging wind gust. So please be aware of this severe weather threat today. Let's go through the entire lower 48 real quick. The rest of the southeast, quiet day. Cannot rule out some thunderstorms though from, Florida to southeast Georgia, the eastern Carolinas. Maybe all the way up into the Delmarva region. Very isolated. You see these pop-up showers down here in Florida, starting to get to more of a typical summer type pattern, as cold fronts don't really make it down here much anymore this time of the year. But you see some isolated thunderstorms here in the extreme eastern sections of North Carolina, maybe even the Outer Banks, the Panhandle of Florida. And then look at those sea breeze thunderstorms down here in western Florida, down here, way deep down in Florida. So we get into the evening hours, we start to see that line of storms starting to surge into areas of Louisiana, but the rest of the southeast very quiet. The northeast today, quiet most of the day, this afternoon, this evening. Once you start to get after the sun sets, we'll start to get some showers up in the Adirondacks, northern Vermont, northern New Hampshire, some energy up into Canada. And then you'll be greeted by some rain down here in southern, southwestern Maine, New Hampshire, maybe even some showers down to Boston. But other than that, it's going to be a quiet daytime period for sure. And really the overnight hours, I mean, maybe just a good night to open up your windows, just let the rain kind of make a noise and drift to sleep. It'd be nice. But the South Central U.S., we pretty much already talked about this, but I'll take a broad look at everything and what the latest long-range HRRR model says. There's those, storms are going to wreak havoc down here, most likely, down here in Texas. There's those storms even in the Panhandle. Of course, it doesn't show a whole lot of convection here in western Oklahoma, but I do think it will be there, most likely. There's that surface low right here, and it always dances around like that. Don't focus too much on that. But then this kind of splits off, and we just got to watch these storms deeper tonight here in southeastern Texas, which I think could be an issue. So be aware of that if you live down there in that region. Up here in the north central U.S., all this first batch of energy will move into Canada. Then another one kind of emerges, and here it is. Watch out for a line of storms here in western South Dakota. I think you're lacking a lot of ingredients, but it could produce some gusty winds, small hail. And you see all this rain kind of making its way through Iowa, areas in Nebraska. We'll see these clusters of storms down here also, Nebraska, Missouri, and Iowa, all these places, Kansas, that we've already spoke on. And we'll just get some scattered rains. It becomes more elevated in nature. Rains into the overnight hours across Iowa, even getting into Wisconsin. We'll take it all the way to daybreak for your Thursday morning. Just dealing with some rain across Wisconsin, southern Wisconsin, western sections of the state, the southern half of Minnesota. Rain up here in the eastern Dakotas. A lot of rain in Iowa, which you guys have just gotten a lot of rain, a lot of storms lately. Northern Illinois, maybe even some scattered downpours in western sections of Indiana possible too. And this is rainfall between now and the next, I think this is about the next 36 hours. I mean, a couple inches of rain down here in eastern sections of Nebraska, Iowa, northern Missouri. So another soaker on the way for your Wednesday into your Wednesday night into your Thursday morning. Western U.S., just some flow, allowing for some low pressure, allowing for some snow flying around the higher elevations of Idaho, Montana, lower elevations, the valley regions, probably just some rain. Same thing all the way down here to the northern Rockies of Colorado, probably some energy producing some snow. But this will drift around. We get into the evening hours. There's some more snow drifting down. It's going to drop several inches, well over a foot of snow in the higher elevations of Montana. Then we got this energy surging into Oregon. This is going to bring the valley region some rain, Cascades of Oregon, a little bit of snow. You're going to have to get way up there in elevation to get that, but this moisture will surge in later tonight and really just pinpoint Oregon. So snowfall between now and the next 48 hours, several inches in the higher elevations of really Montana, just a few inches in Idaho, higher elevations of Wyoming, and down here into Colorado, and a little bit of snow also, maybe several inches, the higher areas of the Cascades of Oregon later tonight. So temperatures, this is what we're looking at. Pocket of cooler air because just some cloud cover up here in the northeast. But once you start to get into the southern tier of New York, even like Connecticut, even like western sections of Mass, start to get into the 60s, even 70s. And then once you start to break loose into the eastern U.S., southeast, 70s, 80s, 90s, it's definitely going to feel like May across the southern tier in the Ohio Valley of the country. But you start to get into the western U.S., you're dealing with that pocket of cooler air because it's lower pressure. But still the southwest is being saved for the most part. For most of the area, I can't speak now, 70s and 80s. It just depends on your location, but you're dealing with some pretty pleasant weather out here. I will mention over the next couple days, tomorrow there is a threat of severe weather, kind of driven off the same setup, just a marginal risk of severe weather. We'll talk a little bit on that probably tomorrow morning. So this could upgrade to a slight risk, but just a level 1 out of 5 risk from Texas all the way up to southwestern Wisconsin in this dark green area. And then we start to move into Friday. This is kind of driven off another impulsive energy that will eject across the plains, but just a marginal risk of severe weather. Eastern Colorado, southern Nebraska, Kansas, and then northern Oklahoma. But look at this huge area that just runs a risk of thunderstorms. I mean, a very large area just runs a general risk of thunderstorms. So We'll discuss more of this when we get a little closer. And then there could be some I cannot speak now. There could be some severe weather days Saturday and Sunday also, but they're not being mentioned much. We're going to jump to Monday, and this is what we got. We got a 15% risk of severe weather. Already a slight risk at day 6. Here we are again. A slight risk, level 2 out of 5 risk of severe weather. All the way up here to Nebraska, same states, Kansas, eastern Kansas, right through the heart of Oklahoma, all the way down to northern Texas, like deja vu. And I can almost guarantee you for Tuesday, we're going to get a slight risk issued for that too. But as of right now, we don't have that. So this is really simply driven off this, guys. You see this big area blue, that's lower pressure. And then this area of orange, red, whatever you want to call it, that's high pressure. Stable conditions typically associated with that. Active stormy conditions, typically with a associated cold front associated with the blue. And watch as, and this is for Saturday evening, watch as this continues to chug into the western U.S. We get into Sunday morning. Notice it's getting closer and closer. And then we're getting into Sunday afternoon. And then we're getting into Monday morning. And then we're getting into Monday afternoon. So if you kind of notice that, the evolution of that, watch how this is what we call an upper trough. Watch how this does basically this number right here. It tilts. And I'll kind of get this in motion again. Watch how it tilts right in here. See how it does that tilt? That is what we call going from a positive tilt to a neutral tilt right there to a negative tilt. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're like, Mitch, what in the world are you talking about? That is a positive tilt. Okay? This is a neutral tilt. And this is a negative tilt. When these troughs go negative, that means that we got a strengthening storm system and probably a storm system producing all kinds of weather depending on the time of the year. And this certainly does that. It goes negatively tilted right over this and the plains. So you already know right in here, that's where you're going to get the pool of favorable all ingredients, overlapping of kinematics and thermodynamics. And one of the things you look at here, and we'll go on into like Tuesday, there it is again. It's a huge trough. And then we get into Wednesday. I think this is going to cause issues for multiple days next week. But one of the things you look at this range, so the last thing we'll look at is moisture. Already Saturday morning, we have a lot of deep moisture basically way all the way up into the Midwest. But check it out as we start to get into Sunday. This Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, a lot of moisture. Then we start to get into Monday. This is Monday morning. Look at these dew points into the 60s. Look at these 70s down here. And then Monday could be the first big day. Look at that dry line set up. Look at the separation between very dry air and very moist air. Dew points into the 60s, all the way up to South Dakota based off this run of the Euro. But man, there is a lot of moist air to work with. That means you're going to have a lot of fuel in the atmosphere to work with. What about the kinematics? We'll figure that out as we get closer. That's all I got, guys. Thank y'all for tuning in. God bless all y'all, and y'all have a wonderful day.